Great to be catching up with the South Australian Liberal Senator Alex Antic. How are you, Alex?
I'm well, thanks, Ricky. How are you?
Great, thanks. Look, we checked in on just the opening sitting days of Parliament and what you said during that sitting, and you spoke about the World Economic Forum. Just walk us through why you've chosen to speak to the Senate about that particular topic.
Yeah, look, it's a big topic. That's the first thing, and I guess global politics and global think tanks are something that I tend to think is getting glossed over a little bit in the Parliament at the moment. We have a whole lot of focus on the stuff that happens inside the four walls of the country for good reason, but this increasingly global world, there's a lot of stuff that's happening on the outside, a lot of power that's shifted to the outside world, and I just think it's time that the Australian Parliament started lifting its eyes a little bit and looking towards what's going on overseas. I mean, the World Economic Forum is one such NGO, I suppose they'd be called, non-government organisation. There are many others. But it's the one that attracts the most attention. And for your listeners' benefit, I'm sure many know, but basically this is a body, a think tank, if you like, which was created back in the 70s, 1971, by a bloke by the name of Klaus Schwab, who's attracted a lot of attention. He's an interesting character, and he's certainly getting a lot of attention. But in essence, it was pitched at being a sort of a global think tank for economics. In reality, though, what we see coming out of that body is some, I think, pretty alarming language. Language called, sort of steeped in really left-wing, kind of ideology that sort of needs to be talked about. I think we need to talk about it more.
Well, when you talk about the Parliament needs to be realistic, talking about what the rich and powerful are doing in the world, I mean, to what extent do you see from the political angle how the rich and powerful can simply ignore what governments are doing and just move their money from one country to another where they're getting favourable treatment and keep lobbying to get that treatment until Parliament's buckle?
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. In fact, that's the other limb to this, is that some of the money that's caught around in these hedge funds and various big businesses, we know the names, companies like Vanguard and BlackRock and companies like that now have trillions of dollars in capital. I think they said the other day, I think it was either Vanguard or BlackRock has something like $30 trillion worth of money tied up in its organisation through investments in various other companies. So, they'll have a chunk of, one company and a chunk of another. Sometimes they're competitors. So it's this really different world that's now facilitated by the internet and by the ease of travel. It's become a global economy. And as you say, quite rightly, what actually we're seeing now is some of these companies really thumbing their nose at the sovereign state and governments because ultimately they're more powerful, and the influence that these companies have in moving their money around from country to country. So, if Australia, for example, doesn't toe the line on climate initiatives, some of these companies will say, right, well, we're pulling out of Australia and we're moving to a country that does do it. So there's this enormous power shift that's happened, and it's been happening incrementally over the last few decades. Once again, to come back to the original point, I don't think we're talking about it enough.
Now, the World Economic Forum, from what I can tell, originally organised by Klaus Schwab and his wife Hilde, seems to have become really the go-to place for these billionaires. Sometimes the parties and whatever goes on behind the scenes next to Davos is almost considered more important than the forum itself. It does seem to be the centre of where all these big deals do get done between these billionaires.
Yeah, it seems to be, and I think increasingly people are becoming aware of this. And look, I mean, let's say it from the outset, there's no real issue with people getting together and talking business. There's no problem with that. I think what people are worried about is the decisions that are being made that are kind of influencing various different countries. And in fact, Klaus Schwab and many in the World Economic Forum are now getting so bold as to really say it out loud. He made a comment back, I think, 6 months ago when he was talking about the Canadian Parliament, where he said, we've got X number of people that we know, our friends, if you like, in the Canadian Parliament, and he said, we are piercing the cabinet. So, I think they're quite upfront about their want to try and use that influence in Parliament. That's where my concern comes from, and so a couple of weeks back I moved in the Senate that there be an addition to our register of interests, and people would probably be familiar with or not surprised by the fact that politicians have to disclose their interests. So, mortgages, if they've got life insurance, if they've got shareholdings in companies, all those sorts of things. But the one thing they haven't had to is their interactions with these NGOs. So we're talking about, whether or not you'd held an office or a job, or you'd ever been employed, or you've ever been given an award by them, which I think now is increasingly important, just to know who our parliamentarians are talking to.
Yeah, look, it's an amazing development that we're at the moment as the world's rich and powerful. Like you mentioned, there's organisations with sort of $30 trillion in assets. When you consider the Australian Parliament is sort of, well, some are concerned and others aren't, with $1 trillion of debt. It just gives you a idea of the size of these massive corporations, these multinationals, relative to Australia, for instance, which is one of the larger economies compared to some of the smaller ones around the world.
Yeah, that's right, and that's exactly the point. Is now I think that we've now got, and I'm sure the net zero decisions that are being made in Australia have as much to do with the interests of keeping capital in the country as they do they do anything else. And for me, that's a really alarming situation to be in, where we've got this building influence of corporates into our government. I want the centre of power in this country to be Parliament House in Canberra, not Davos in Switzerland.
All right, Senator Antic, we'll keep track of your interest in this particular topic. We haven't talked about the Great Reset. We've got a segment called Conspire With Me on a Breakfast Flow where we talk about conspiracies, but the Great Reset might be what we talk about next time.
We've got a lot to cover, Ricky. I'm looking forward to it.